We continue now at the top of Daf Tesvav Meseches Bava Kamma. This is Bava Kamma Daf 15a. On the previous summit, the Gemara was analyzing the line in the Mishnah which says Al Pi Eidim, that when it comes to damages, so the payment has to be if Eidim are testifying, if there are witnesses that are testifying that there was a damage that occurred. And the Gemara said, what exactly does that mean? And the Gemara suggested what it means is it has to be Al Pi Eidim, as opposed to Mode B'Knas V'Achar Kach Bo Eidim. Let's say the person would admit, and it's a situation of a Knas, it's a situation of a fine, and then Eidim would come, so then it's not Al Pi Eidim, then the person was Mode B'Knas, and then he's going to be Potter. That could be the meaning of the Mishnah. But the Gemara said there's another mandomer that says Mode B'Knas V'Achar Kach Bo Eidim is Chayev. So if that's the case, what is the Chiddush of the Mishnah when it says Al Pi Eidim? And the Gemara now says the Chiddush of the Mishnah is in the next line of the Mishnah. The next line of the Mishnah is B'nei Chorin Uv'nei Bris. The next line of the Mishnah is that the Eidim have to be B'nei Chorin, they have to be free people, and they have to be B'nei Bris, they have to be people of the covenant, meaning they have to be Jewish. The idea is B'nei Chorin L'mu'utei Avodim, it's B'nei Chorin, they have to be Eidim. In order to be kosher Eidim, you have to be B'nei Chorin, meaning Avodim are not allowed to be Eidim. And B'nei Bris L'mu'utei Ovdei Kochavim, and when it says B'nei Bris, it means Jewish people, to exclude non-Jews, to exclude the idol worshippers. With Tzricha, it's necessary to say both. Diyash mean an Eved, because if it only said that an Eved is not allowed to be an Eid, Mishum de'ein lo yachas, because the halacha is that an Eved, there's no yichus, there's no lineage when it comes to an Eved. In other words, halachas they have to do with, let's say, fathers and sons or things like that. It doesn't apply when it comes to an Eved. Avol nachri diyesh lo yachas, but when it comes to a non-Jew, there is a concept of lineage. For example, let's say arayas between relatives by nachrim, by non-Jews also applies. There's dinim of yichus when it comes to non-Jews. So aimalo, so I would say no, I would say maybe they are able to be Eidim. V'yashmin a nachri, and if I only taught, if the Mishnah only taught that a nachri is not allowed to be an Eid, mishum de lo shayach b'mitzvahs. That's because a nachri is not shayach, is not relevant in mitzvahs. Aval eved the shayach b'mitzvahs, when it comes to an eved kanani, there is a chiyuv, there's an obligation, there's a relevance to mitzvahs. Aimalo, so I would say no, maybe the eved would be allowed to be an Eid, so tzricha, so that's why it's necessary to say that both an eved and ovdei kochavim, they're not able to be Eidim. Rashi says, B'nei Chorin sheyihu ha'edim b'nei Chorin uv'nei Bris. Again, the Eidim have to be free and they have to be Jewish. Eved ein lo yachas, and Eved has no lineage. De'amrinan meperak habal yevemto ha'kol modim be'eved she'ein lo yachas. That's what it says in Yevamis. Everybody agrees an Eved has no yichus. K'dichsiv im ha'chamor am hadomin l'chamor. It's the nation that's compared to donkeys. That's talking about avodim. Nachri yesh lo yachas, but a Nachri does have lineage. K'dim afarish hasam, like it's explained over there. Dechsiv hadrimun ben tavrimun ben chazol. It talks about the lineage of these non-Jews, and therefore we understand that there is a concept of lineage when it comes to non-Jews. Eved Kanani shayach b'mitzvahs, and Eved Kanani is shayach in mitzvahs. Sha'anoshim chayavas ben, any mitzvahs that a woman is chayav in, and Eved Kanani is chayav. The Gamar lo meisha, it's learned out from a Gzeira Shava, from Isha, from a woman. And the Gemara continues at the two dots, v'hanoshim b'chlal hanezik. It says that women also are part of the laws of damages. The Gemara says, Meno hanimili, from where do we know this? Amar Rav Yehuda Marav. Rav Yehuda says that Rav says, v'chein tana devei Rabbi Yishmael, was also taught like this in the yeshiva of Rabbi Yishmael. Amar Kra, the pasuk says, Ish o isha ki yasu mikol chatos. It says a man or a woman who does any of these kinds of sins. Now the context of this pasuk is again the same context that we had about Shvuas HaPikadon. It talks about the fact that a person denies that he owes a particular pikadon, a particular deposit, so he swears falsely. So then the halacha is, in such a situation, he has to bring a carbon, he has to pay back the principal and a fifth. So it says over there, Ish o isha ki yasu mikol chatos, hishva kasav isha leish. So the Gemara says, the pasuk says that women and men are equal when it comes to all kinds of punishments that are in the Torah. Devei Rebbe Lazar taught, in the yeshiva of Rebbe Lazar taught the following source, a different source. V'yela hamishpatim asher tasim lifneim. It says these are the laws you put in front of them. In front of them means the men and the women, hishva akasav isha leish. The idea is again that the women and the men are equal l'chol dinin shabbatorah in terms of all of monetary dinim, in terms of all of these kinds of laws of the Torah. Devei Chizkiya of Rabbi Yossi Haglili Tana, the yeshiva of Chizkiya and Rabbi Yossi Haglili, they taught as follows. Amar Kra, the pasuk says, v'hemis isha isha. It says he kills a man or a woman. So the idea is hishva akasav isha leish l'chol misa shabbatorah. When it comes to all kinds of death, in terms of any penalties that involve death, that's the same whether it be let's say a man is killed or whether it be a woman that is killed. The context of that pasuk is v'imshor nagachu. The full pasuk is v'imshor nagachu mitmol shilshom v'huad bevala v'lo yishmerenu. Talking about a shore that is a muad vehemis isha, and it kills a man or a woman. It doesn't matter if it's a man or a woman. Hashor yisakel. The halach is that the shore is stoned. The axe gets stoned. Vegamba olav yumas, and also the owner of the shore is killed. It doesn't really mean killed. It means to say the payment of what we call kofar. But the idea is again l'chol misos shebetorah. Men and women are equal. And the question is, why do we need three sources to equate men and women with regards to these halachas? The Gemara says with tzrichi, they're all necessary. Diashmin and kamaisa, because if we only had the first one by shvuas hapikadon, hasam hu dechas rachmana Allah, there maybe the Torah has mercy on her, on the woman, kiechi detavela kapar, because it involves a carbon, it gives her an atonement. We want her to have the atonement as well. Avol dinin, but when it comes to, let's say, laws that have to do with monetary issues, ish devar masa umaton in, a man who does things in business, so it makes sense that he's part of those laws. Ishalo, but a woman would not be part of those laws. V'yashmin and dinin, and if it only taught us about dinin, about these monetary laws, we want to give her an opportunity to have a livelihood as well. Avol kapara, but when it comes to kapara atonement, ish devar mitzvah in, a man who has more mitzvahs that he has to do, so it makes sense that he has this kapara. Ish delav bas mitzvah lo, but a woman who does not have as many mitzvahs, she would not be part of that. V'yashmin and hanitardi, and if we only had those two, hacham misham kapara, here there's a reason because it involves atonement. V'acham misham chayusa, and over here there's a reason because it involves livelihood. Avol inyan ketala, but when it comes to the issue of murder, ish devar mitzvah l'shalim kofer, so then again we would say a man, so there we'll say there'll be halacha of the payment of kofer. If a man is killed, it's a person who's involved in mitzvahs, but isha lo, but a woman, that would not be the case. V'yashmin and kofer, and if it only taught us by kofer, misham de'iko ibn neshama, that's something that's relevant to a loss of life. It makes sense to equate men and women. Aval hani tarti deleko ibn neshama imalo, but I might think by the other two scenarios, by the other two cases we mentioned, so there's no ibn neshama, so maybe women would not be included. So tzricha, that's why all of these, it's necessary to teach this halacha by all of these different cases. And the Gemara continues at the two dots. The Mishnah said, "Hanizik v'hamazik b'tashlumin." Both the nizik and the mazik, they're involved in the payment. Now we understand why the mazik's involved in the payment. He has to pay for the damage that he does. But what does it mean to say that the nizik is involved in the payment? And the Gemara says, "Itmar." It was stated the following machlokas amoraim, which will be relevant to this issue. Palga nizka. When it comes to paying chatzi nezik, let's say you have a tam, a shore, an ox that's a tam, so then it does damage, the halach is it pays half of the damage. So what is the understanding of chatzi nesek? Rav Papa or Mamona, Rav Papa says the payment is really mammon, meaning you're actually paying for the damage, you're just not paying for the full damage. Rav Huna B'Reid Rav Yoshua Amar Kanasa. Rav Huna B'Reid Rav Yoshua says no, it's actually a fine. Really, you shouldn't have to pay anything, and the fact that you're paying anything at all is a knas, and here the knas is that you have to pay half. Rav Papa Amar Mamona, Rav Papa says it's considered mammon, you're actually paying for the damage, because he holds stam shvorim lav becheskas shimur kaiman, that when it comes to a general ox, they're not considered to be protected. It's something you should have been more careful. Uvedinu deboy l'shlumei kule, really you should pay the whole thing. V'rachmanahu dechasale, but the Torah has mercy on the person dakati lo yayiture, because his shore has not yet become a muad, and so therefore he doesn't have to pay for the whole thing. But really he should have to pay for the whole thing according to Rav Papa. Rav Huna B'Reid Rav Yoshua, Rav Huna the son of Rav Yoshua says kanasa, that it's considered a kanas. It's considered to be a fine. Kasavar stam shvarim bechezkas shimur kaimi. He holds that when it comes to a shore, really it's something that normally wouldn't gore. Normally something you don't have to be afraid of, worried about. And so therefore, uvadinhu delol l'shalem klal, really you shouldn't have to pay anything at all, because what happened is something it never would have occurred to the person that his shore would gore. V'rachmanahu dekansi, it's just the Torah, they say you have to pay this fine, you have to pay chatzi nezik, ki heichi delintari l'torah, in order to encourage the person to protect, to watch over his shore. And so you have this machlokus over here, when the person has to pay chatzi nezik, is that considered mamona, or is it considered to be a knas? And the Gemara now brings in our line of the Mishnah. Tanan, we learned in our Mishnah, hanizik v'hamaz, and again it says the nizik and the mazik, they're part of the payment. And so the Gemara says, I understand according to the one who says that chatzi nezik is considered mammon, so hainu d'shayach nizik b'tashlumin, so the nizik, the person who got damaged, he's also paying a little, because really he's entitled to get the whole thing. He should be paid, he should be compensated for all the damage. Let's say one shore gored another shore and killed it, so he should be paid back for the entire shore that was killed, but he's only paid half, and so therefore he's also relevant in the payment. He's paying, so to speak. That's what it means. means that the nizik and the mazik are involved in the payment. We understand that if you say palga nizka mamona, elalamandamar palga nizka kanasa, but according to the one who says the chatzi nezik is a fine, so really he's getting more than he should. Hashter de lavdi de shakel, he's actually taking something that really shouldn't be his. Really, the person is not really responsible. It didn't have to occur to him that his shore would gore, but there's a fine that he has to pay half. So b'tashlum and he says, so are you saying that the nizik is part of the payment? He's not part of the payment at all. On the contrary, he's getting something that he really is not even entitled to. So what does it mean according to the one who says the palga nizka kanasa? What does it mean that hanizik v'hamazik b'tashlumin in our Mishnah? And the Gemara answers, lo, no, nitzrucha, it isn't necessary, because what it means is as follows in the Mishnah. Lo nitzrucha ela lepchas nevela. What it's needed is for the deterioration of the nevela, of the carcass of the animal, as we mentioned earlier, that the moment that, let's say, the nizik's animal is killed, he's the one that has to take that nevela, and if it goes down in value, he suffers that loss. That's what it means he's part of the tashlum, and he also will have to pay something. The Gemara says, pchas nevela hatanin le'reisha, but we already learned this halacha pchas nevela earlier in the Mishnah, so we're repeating it over here. Tashlume nezek malamed shabayla mitaflim benevela. We said that when it comes to the payment of the nezek, so it's like a tashlumin, it's a completion of the payment. The idea of completion is that the original owner keeps the nevela, and the mazik has to complete the amount. He has to compensate him according to whatever extra was the damage. So you see from that earlier Mishnah of this concept of bayla mitaflim benevela, why are we repeating ourselves? And the Gemara says we do need to repeat it, because chada betam v'chada b'muad. Because one time we want to say this halacha is true by a tam, and we also one time we say it again that it applies by a muad, and it applies by both of them. Utzricha, it's necessary to teach this halacha bayla mitaflim benevela by both tam and muad. The yashmin and tam, because if we only learned it by a tam, mishum da'akati lo ayayid, because over there the animal hasn't even become a muad yet. Avol muad e malo, but when the animal already was a muad, so it's really the person's fault who owned the shore that did the damage. So then I would say maybe he's not mitaflim benevela. Maybe the nizik doesn't have to deal with the nevela. Miyashmin and muad, and if we only said it by muad, mishum da'kamishalim kuli, because at least over there the nizik is getting everything, so maybe he should also have to deal with the nevela. Avol tam, but by a time where he's only getting chatzi nezik, he's only getting paid half. E malo, I might say he doesn't have to deal with the nevela. So tzricha, that's why it's necessary to teach it by both cases. And the Gemara continues, Tashma, come in here the following proof. This is an issue to the issue of whether or not Chatzi Nezik is Knas or Mammon. And this is from a Mishnah later on. Ma bein tam lemud. It says, what's the difference between a tam and a mud? Shatam meshalim Chatzi Nezik migufo. Because a tam pays Chatzi Nezik migufo from the body of the animal. The idea over there is that, let's say a tam does damage, so you're never going to pay more than what the tam itself is worth. You're paying up to Chatzi Nezik and only up to the amount that the tam is worth. Umud meshalim Nezik shalim minhu aliyah. But by a mud, you're going to pay the full damages, and you're even going to pay from the best of the property, even if it's worth much more than the shore that caused the damage. And so the Gemara now says, if this is the only difference between tam and muad, the amisa now, if it's true that you're going to say that chatzi nezik is a knas, so listening namiha, you should have the following distinction between a tam and a muad. Tam einu meshalim al piatzma, that a tam will not pay if the person admits, because moda beknas, if you admit by a fine, you're putter, and muad meshalim al piatzma, but by a muad where it's not a knas, where it's mammon, so then even if he admits, he's going to have to pay. That should also be listed if chatzi nezik is a knas. That distinction should be in the Mishnah. And the Gemara says Tana v'shayar. The Gemara says no. The Mishnah, you're right. The Mishnah had one distinction, but left off. That distinction might have been left off. My shayar, the high shayar. But what else was left off? That this should be left off. You can't just say one thing was left off. And the Gemara says no. Shayar chatzi kofer. The difference is when it comes to the kofer payment. Again, the kofer payment applies. Let's say a person's shore kills a person, so that only applies by muad. It doesn't apply by tam. But that's not mentioned in the Mishnah. The Mishnah left off some of the differences between tam and muad. But the Gemara says chatzi kofer doesn't count. Imishum chatzi kofer. If you're saying that chatzi kofer was left off, it's not necessarily true. Lav sheyurahu. It wasn't necessarily left off. Hamani Rabbi Yossi HaGlili. He damar tam mishalim chatzi kofer. Because maybe the Mishnah is following Rabbi Yossi HaGlili, who says that a tam does pay chatzi kofer. So in terms of kofer, tam and muad are really the same, and therefore you can't necessarily say that was left off. And the Gemara continues, Tashma, come in here, another proof, and we will continue with this discussion in the next video on Daf Tezvav Amud Beis.